Okay, so this is part two of our twofer video. In the first part, we restored and modded up Kyosho Javelin. So here's the second piece. This time we're going to put back together a Kyosho Optima 4-wheel drive, which is the same as the Javelin, except the Javelin has the roll cage on top, and this, instead of having the roll cage, has a body. And that is an original vintage Optima body. So let's get down to it. First things first, let's start working with the rear section. This is kind of halfway apart because obviously, like I said, this was actually the Javelin and it was chain drive, and we wanted the belt drive on the Javelin. So that's why we ended up with the original Javelin chassis here. So first thing we're going to do, I think, is go ahead and put the shock tower back on here. As much as I would have loved to have used Allen head screws, the problem that I have is that the Allen head screws are machine screws, and all of these screws here are going into the plastic, and they have to be self-tapping screws. So the machine screws just aren't going to work out for us. So no Allen heads. Okay, I've got the shock tower back together. The next thing I'm going to want to do is do the front bulkhead here. Okay, so I need to get a couple of screws in here. Okay. Okay, this guy here is going to come in and be put right here. Sure, this is going to, and then This is going to go like that, but we need to make sure that we put our dog bones in first. Okay. All right, that's one. Got to screw that down. I'm going to need 2 long 3mm screws that go in there. And we're going to need a nut for the back. Okay, so the rear is not going to be much different. We're just going to line this up and bring this guy into play here. I can see that this has got to be screwed in. I mean, this has got to come in here first because there's a little gap right there that this needs to slide into. So you're not going to be able to do it after the fact. So got to do it now. I'm going to go ahead and screw the screws into, tighten this top piece before it. So now we can put these guys in. Start with this one. Let me see here. I might have this in backwards. No, I think that's right, because this is going to come and it's going to screw into there. Oh, this is right. I got this in right. False alarm. But it never hurts to just double check your work. All right. So next thing you want to do, make sure the dog bone is in place. And we're going to go ahead and screw this down. Okay. So I'm going to do the same for the other side here. Okay. Okay. That works. That works. So now let's put the shocks in. But before we put the shocks in, let's go ahead and put the center gear in here. Now this center gear is 3D printed because it's hard to find this one part. And even when you do find it, everybody seems to want an arm and a leg for it. Problem is, doesn't seem to quite fit. It looks like it's just a little bit too large. That's interesting. Okay, well, I compared this to the real deal on one of my other Kyoshos, and it turns out that sure enough, this diameter on this 3D printed part is too big. So this came with the buggy, so I think I'm just going to go and find the STL file for this and just make my own and 3D print my own, because this obviously is not going to work. In the meantime, we can go ahead and put the shocks on here and move forward with the build. So I'm just going to clean these up just a little bit. These are supposed to be red. The anodizing was taken off of them. They also Mickey Moused this thing because this thing is broken. So I apparently need shock collars as well. So we're going to go ahead and order the right shock collars for these things and do this the right way. All of them are cracked. This one is completely mangled also. I might end up having to take these apart. I just wish I had a rebuild kit for these, that I don't. Probably one more thing I'll have to hunt down. Otherwise, I'd be taking these apart and putting them in the ultrasonic cleaner and rebuilding them. This one's cracked also. So I can see why they put the zip ties on there, but seriously, dudes, I mean, how long did you think that was going to last? All right, so I guess we can't really do the shocks right now either, and that's really all that's left. We do have a body. I even have an original driver for this thing. So by the time we come back, I'll also have these screwed on, the battery supports. So yeah, stay tuned. Be right back. All right, we're back. So let me show you what I did off camera, and then we'll go forward with this and hopefully wrap this up today. So the way I originally, well, let me back up. The steering, I did this off camera. What normally happens with the steering is there are two bell cranks, one on each side. I think you saw that in the Javelin in part 1. And then these tie rods, they're short and they go to each one of those bell cranks, like this guy here, okay? But the way that I got this was one long tie rod here goes all the way to the left and bolts down to the top of this bell crank. And then the smaller one goes on to the bottom of it. And then the arm here is controlled by the servo. And that's, you know, pushing this and pulling it that the servo would do would make the steering go left and right. I opted to leave it like that for two reasons. One, to buy the cranks, the shaft, the screws, and everything that would have entailed putting that back to original format would have just been too costly. It's just not worth it considering the build that we have going here. Now, if I really wanted to bring this to full vintage, I can just go ahead and buy those things later. But didn't want to really spend like north of $50 just for the steering when this works just as well. And it is still all vintage. It's just put together in a different way. So that's what I did off camera, is I put the steering, you know, in. The other thing that I did is these shocks are the original shocks, but they're anodized red, but the anodizing obviously was taken off by the previous owner. The zip ties on there is to hold the collar in place because every single one of these 4 collars is cracked. So rather than trying to source original Kyosho collars and all that stuff, I'm going to put these in a bag. They'll go with the buggy if I ever sell it, because they are the originals, even though the anodizing's gone. But in the meantime, in order to get this put together, I went ahead and purchased aftermarket shocks for it. And I got titanium colored ones because I think they look cool. I could have gotten red ones, but you know, since these are aftermarket, I might as well go with something that I like. So the 2 shorter ones will go in front, and the 2 longer ones will go in back. Now, these come with hardware for them, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to pop out the ball ends here and use the originals. Hopefully they're the same size. Maybe not, looking at this. I don't know. I'm going to take these balls out and let me see if I can use the originals, because I'd like to see the originals on here if I can. So that's what I'm going to do next. And then we'll put the shocks on. And then in the meantime, we'll put the original ones aside. Okay. So first things first is popping the ball end out. Did this off. There you go. So now we'll do the same with this. These are a little trickier to get out, though. Let's see if we can make this work. Okay, I'm going to go to a vise and see if I can, there we go. Guess I don't have to go to a vise. So that's the original. And let me see if these should fit, because I mean, the balls are basically, yeah, they do. So that's what I'm going to do with the front. I'm going to take the other one out and we'll use the original hardware. Okay. I put the other one on to see if it's going to work, so I'll just go ahead and screw that on and then pop that on afterwards. For the rear, I'm going to do the same thing. For the rear, the bottom piece is already there, so I'm going to go ahead and take these out. So these screw in right here. Okay, so what would be the right thing to do here? The right thing to do would be to get the right shocks without this thick collar at the top, and to get shocks like this so it'll clear really easy and we don't need these spacers. But we don't have that right now. I want to wrap this up, and I can always buy the right shocks and put them on afterwards. So bear with me, we'll just do it this way for now, just to get this build finished here. I mean, shocks aren't rocket science. I may make it seem that way sometimes, but it's not. It should clear this. Yeah, and it barely does, but it does clear it. And I'll show you in a second once I get these lock nuts on. I didn't need these spacers because that ball end at the top has enough clearance, and the nut is wider than the opening, so it's fine. So there you go. And it just barely clears it. There's no rubbing. So I think that's what we're going to go with. Okay, we'll just do the other side now. No, I did take the wider ones off, and I put the original ball ends back on, because in the end these gave me too much space. I would have just needed a smaller spacer here, but I opted to just go with the original ends. I think I showed you this already before. They're just smaller in length. Okay, so there we go. All right, let's do the rears. Rear should be the same. Okay, there we go. That's the rears. Got a nice snap to it. Okay. I notice the steering buckles just a little bit when it's all the way down because these rod ends in the middle here are at a bit of an angle. The tie rods hit the bottom here, so I need to loosen this up just a little bit to prevent the tie rods from hitting the A-arm, because that's what it's doing right now because the shocks are so low. I mean, the suspension is so low. So I'm going to move these shocks up. I could bend the tie rods, but I really don't want to do that. I have room to move these shocks up. Apparently these shocks might be just a little bit longer than the originals. So we'll just do that. Yeah, that much better. That gives it the clearance that tie rod needs. Okay, so there we go. That feels good. And the steering, not bad. This one here is rubbing just a little bit at the bottom. But I think we can live with that. It's not too bad. I can always lift the servo up just a little bit with the washer underneath it. There's ample room for it to be pushed up. So this is good for now. So the other thing is the counter gear, the center counter gear. This is 3D printed. It came with the buggy, but I've also seen them on eBay for like 10 bucks. This counter gear, the original, is expensive if you find it. I can tell you right now, this 3D gear sucks. It has no real, the material that was used to print it out, you know, it can stretch and it can shrink. It's not the same material the original gear is made from. And in this case, it's stretched a little bit and it doesn't mesh in very well with the other one. So I have an original, and you can see that the original, unlike the 3D printed one, slides in just fine. So word of caution with 3D printed parts, they do tend to expand and shrink, and obviously that's not good. Again, depending on the material that they used. If they used Delrin, it might not have done that, but this isn't Delrin. I can tell right off the bat. Okay, so at this point, got the shocks on, got the gear on. Let's put the gear case on here. Put the little weather stripping on. Okay. So that's nice. Motor. That's what we need. We need a motor. So since this is going to be a partner to the Javelin in part 1, let's use the same motor. AYK 480. Okay, I'm going to clear some of this table off so we can get a little bit more organized. Okay, so now that I got this cleaned up just a little bit, let's go ahead and put this motor in here. I'm just going to barely tighten this because we have to move the motor to have it mesh with the pinion gear. So there's the other 2 holes up here to adjust. I'm going to put it on this end one for now. Okay. This way I can move it a little bit. We'll get the pinion gear in here. I'm looking for the flat spot on the shaft. And it's at the top, so should we put the set screw on the top there? And then we move the motor in towards the shaft. Not too tight, not too loose. So the first thing we're going to do is tighten. Let's tighten the pinion gear on here. Okay. And so now that that's really nice and flush, we can move the motor to where this is meshing. Again, not too tight and not too loose. Okay. So there we go. Look at that. That's beautiful. Nice and smooth. Okay. So now we can put the gear cover on. Okay, got the pin in. That is nice and tight. And I think we are set. Now, I'm going to put the wheels on, but I'm not going to, this is an original body. I may cut it because it's already kind of cracked, but it's cracked in the place it's going to be cut away, so I'm not concerned about it. But it's old and it's brittle, so I'm going to have to be real careful about how I cut this thing. Because it's so old and brittle, I'm afraid of it cracking. So I might just do the whole thing with the scissors. I don't know. I'm going to think about it a little bit more before I do that. So I may not get this done for this video, but that's what we're looking at. Okay, so we've got left is, well, we got to put the bumper back. We know that. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll put the wheels and tires on. And maybe a couple of finishing screws here and there that I'm already seeing are missing. And we'll go from there. There's a screw missing here, but only because we didn't put that other bell crank on for the steering. So that's why there's an empty hole there. Okay. Put this guy back. This is the bearing. There's a couple of screws here that go on the top that I'm missing, so put those in right now. So I opted to stick with the original, well, they're not original, but the wheels and tires that came with this, because for the most part this is all silver and black. So there is no front or back to these. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these guys on. And I opted to get these wheel flanges that are in black, match the wheels. Actually, I have a lot of different colors for these. I don't know if they still make them or not, but I got a whole bunch of them just because I know I'll use them. So. I'll just hand tighten it for now. Okay. The nice thing about these flanges from Yaw Racing is they have these little protrusions that are kind of etched into the back that prevent them from loosening, which is pretty cool. Okay. So this build, there we go. I knew that after we put the wheels and tires on here, that binding that was taking place with the tie rods would go away, and it certainly has gone away because it kind of pushes the shocks up a little bit. So that works really nice. Okay, so I'm going to order an aftermarket body for this guy. And instead of wiping out the original body, that way I won't be scared to mess it up. So, but this is the way this looks now. I think I'll probably just end this video here, and I'll leave the body and painting for another video. But there you go, Optima 4-wheel drive. And what did we start with? So we have the Optima there. And this was a pretty messed up, beat up car, and it came as a pair with the Javelin that we finished in part 1. So not a bad deal. We ended up having enough parts spare and within the two to, you know, this started off as a beat up Javelin, and this one at the top was a so-so Javelin with just a few pieces that needed repair. So we used some of the Javelin pieces that came with this to repair the first one. So we have a beautiful original with aftermarket hop-ups for the period Javelin, and we have a really decent looking Optima 4-wheel drive. The Javelin was based on this. So the difference here is that this obviously has more modern wheels and tires, and I think I like the black better than the originals, because we do have the originals, but they're white. So that's why I stuck with these, and obviously we changed the shocks. The shocks are modern shocks, even though we have the original shocks. The original shocks had problems, obviously, so this is what we chose to do. Both of them have AYK gold motors in them, which I think offsets the black color really nicely. So yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for these two builds, and that was part 1 and part 2. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made it. I hope I made enough mistakes for you to learn something more than what's just in the manual. And hey, like I always say, you know, have fun what you do. Enjoy life. You only live once. Take care. Well, if you stuck around this long, I should at least give you a little something. So how about a sneak peek at one of the next videos that I'm going to do. It's going to be a tear down and rebuild of this vintage 1980s all original Tamiya Avante. So this is almost like the holy grail to some. It was their first real competition car back in the day. And yeah, so this is going to be our next tear down and rebuild project. We'll tear it down, clean it up, and bring it back to life again in all its glory. So stay tuned, because that's going to be a doozy. So enjoy. Thanks for sticking out this long.